In the winter of 1692, a mysterious illness struck a small Puritan village in Massachusetts. Young girls, twisted in pain, screamed out in terror and accused their neighbors of witchcraft. Within months, the accusations spread like wildfire, reaching farmers, ministers, and even children. No one was safe. 20 people were executed. 5 more died in jail, all in the name of cleansing the town from evil. But this wasn't a tale of magic. It was a story of fear, of mass hysteria, of the deadly power of accusation. This is the true story of the Salem Witch Trials, a haunting chapter in American history where truth was silenced and innocence was lost. Before we dive deeper into this chilling chapter of history, take a moment to subscribe to Sleepless Documentaries. We bring you haunting true stories, forgotten events, and the mysteries that still echo through time. Hit the like button if stories like this matter to you. And let us know in the comments, do you think something like the Salem Witch Trials could happen again? Now, let's step back into 1692. Long before the first accusations, Salem was already a village divided. In 1692, the people of Salem Village lived in the shadows, both literal and spiritual. Life in colonial New England was harsh, isolated, and deeply religious. Every thunderstorm, every failed crop, every death was seen as a sign from God. The Puritans who settled the region believed they were chosen by God to build a new society, pure, obedient, and vigilant. But that purity came with paranoia. The devil was not a metaphor in Salem. He was real, active, and always waiting. Women were expected to be silent, modest, and obedient. Children were seen, but not heard. Joy was suspect. Dancing was forbidden. An individual thought could be dangerous. At the heart of Salem's tension was a bitter divide. Salem Village versus Salem Town. The village was rural, isolated, and devout. The town was coastal, wealthier, more modern, and driven by trade. Families in the village resented the town's influence and feared that its worldly values threatened their way of life. Old grudges over land ownership, church leadership, and inheritance had already sown seeds of distrust. Add to this, the lingering trauma of war raids by Native American tribes on the frontier had devastated nearby settlements. Refugees flooded into Salem, bringing stories of terror, fear, and loss. And then, the final ingredient: a minister who divided rather than united. Reverend Samuel Parris, a rigid and unpopular preacher, had brought with him a slave named Tituba from the Caribbean. In a household already struggling with fear, suspicion, and unrest. These were the conditions in which hysteria was born, not from sudden madness, but from years of simmering tension. The stage was set. The match was about to be struck. It began with 2 young girls, Betty Parris, age 9, and her cousin Abigail Williams, age 11. They lived in the home of Reverend Samuel Parris, Salem Village's stern and divisive minister. One cold January day in 1692, the girls began to act strangely. They screamed, threw themselves on the ground, crawled under furniture, spoke in tongues, claimed invisible forces were pinching and choking them. Doctors had no answers. So they turned to a familiar cause: the devil. Soon, more girls followed. Ann Putnam, Mercy Lewis, Elizabeth Hubbard, each echoing the same convulsions and cries of torment. The village, already fragile, now trembled with fear. The pressure to identify the source of the evil mounted. Who had cursed the children? Who was the witch hiding among them? And then came the first accusations. The girls pointed to 3 women. Sarah Good, a homeless beggar known for her temper. Sarah Osborne, who hadn't attended church in months. And Tituba, the enslaved woman from Barbados who lived in the Paris home. Each woman was already marginalized. Each was an easy target. And under interrogation, Tituba confessed. She claimed that Satan came to her, that she had signed his book, that she had seen other witches flying on poles and conspiring to destroy Salem. Her confession stunned the village and gave credibility to the accusations. If there were more witches out there, Salem had to find them. Fast. In just days, a wave of paranoia flooded the village. Whispers became testimony. Grudges became evidence. The spark had caught, and the fire had begun to spread. With Tituba's confession, the dam burst. She spoke of a black man from Boston, of strange creatures, and of witches hiding in plain sight. She said there were others, many others, conspiring with her. Salem's deepest fears had been confirmed. Now, the afflicted girls were no longer victims, they were heroes. Their accusations were seen as divine revelations, and they had more to say. One by one, more names were shouted out. Martha Corey, Rebecca Nurse, Elizabeth Proctor. These weren't just outcasts, these were respected members of the community. But in Salem, reputation no longer mattered. A single word could condemn you. Past argument, a strange habit, a misinterpreted glance, anything could be twisted into evidence of witchcraft. The court relied on spectral evidence claims that the accused spirit had harmed someone in a vision or dream. It was invisible, unprovable, and impossible to defend against. Those who denied the charges were pressed harder. Those who confessed were often spared. Some, out of fear or desperation, began naming others to save themselves. Children accused their parents. Neighbors turned on neighbors. Even a 4-year-old girl was imprisoned. Jails filled to overflowing. Fear poisoned the air. And what had started as a whisper in a minister's house had now become a roaring storm. The lines between truth and madness were gone. Salem was no longer searching for justice. It was hunting for survival. In the spring of 1692, the colony of Massachusetts authorized a special court. The Court of Oyer and Terminer, meaning to hear and determine. Its mission was clear: root out the devil's agents and punish them swiftly. Presiding over the trials was Lieutenant Governor William Stoughton, a man more concerned with purging evil than questioning evidence. The accused were brought in shackles. They stood before crowds, some pregnant, some elderly, some barely more than children. Nearly all protested their innocence. But in Salem, innocence was not a defense. The afflicted girls played a central role. In the courtroom, they wailed, convulsed, claimed to see ghosts hovering over the defendants. If they screamed, the court listened. The evidence was flimsy: spectral testimony, odd dreams, forgotten arguments twisted into motives for witchcraft. And yet, conviction after conviction followed. Bridget Bishop, the first to hang, was outspoken and wore bright clothes. That was enough. On June 10, 1692, she was executed on Gallows Hill. Others soon followed: Sarah Good, Elizabeth Howe, Susanna Martin, Rebecca Nurse, a grandmother known for her piety. Even she was not spared. Many who confessed were allowed to live, though imprisoned. But to confess meant damning your own soul and often condemning others in the process. Those who refused to confess, who maintained their innocence, were seen as unrepentant and therefore guilty. The trials became a machine, feeding off fear and running without mercy. Salem was no longer a village. It was a courtroom, a prison, and a scaffold. As summer turned to fall in 1692, the executions in Salem showed no signs of slowing. With each new hanging, the village sank deeper into fear and silence. In total, 19 people were hanged on Gallows Hill. Each one marched to their death while declaring their innocence. Their pleas were ignored, their prayers unheard. The method was grim. There were no flames, no pyres. Just a wooden platform, a rope, and a crowd. Among the condemned was Rebecca Nurse, age 71, frail, devout, and beloved. Her death shocked even her accusers. If she could be a witch, anyone could. Then came Giles Corey, a farmer who refused to plead guilty or innocent. By law, he couldn't be tried without a plea, so they crushed him literally by placing heavy stones on his chest. For 2 days, he endured the torture. His last words were, "More weight." By October, the executions had become impossible to ignore. Cracks were forming in the court's authority. Ministers began to speak out. People who had once cheered the trials now recoiled in horror. Governor William Phibbs, upon returning from war, was stunned by the chaos. He shut down the Court of Oyer and Terminer and forbade further arrests. The spell had finally broken, but the damage was done. Families were destroyed. Land was seized, reputations ruined. And 20 innocent lives had been taken by their own neighbors. What had begun as a search for the devil had ended in blood and regret. Salem was left to mourn, to rebuild, and to live with what it had done. When the final gavel fell and the hangings stopped, Salem was no longer the same. The trials had torn the village apart, families left grieving, children orphaned, communities divided beyond repair. Over time, the colony began to confront the truth that no witches had ever been found, that the justice system had failed. That fear had won. In 1697, a day of public fasting and repentance was declared. One judge, Samuel Sewell, stood in church and openly confessed his guilt. "I desire to take the blame and shame of it." And years later, compensation was offered to some victims' families, but money could not erase what had been done. The scars ran too deep. It wasn't until 1702 that the trials were officially declared unlawful. And not until 1957, over 250 years later, that the state of Massachusetts formally apologized. Today, Salem is a place of memory, a town where history whispers through gravestones and museums, where the word witch no longer means evil but warning. The Salem Witch Trials remain one of the darkest chapters in American history, not because of magic, but because of what fear, ignorance, and unchecked power can do to a society. It is a story we must not forget. Because when truth is silenced, hysteria speaks the loudest. The Salem Witch Trials are more than a tragedy of the past. They are a mirror of human nature. In just 1 year, fear overpowered reason, suspicion drowned truth. And ordinary people, mothers, farmers, ministers, children, were turned into monsters in the eyes of their neighbors. The victims left no magic behind, only silence and lessons. That justice must be grounded in evidence, not emotion. That power must be questioned, not blindly followed. That every society is vulnerable when fear becomes law. Today we look back not only to remember, but to understand. The Salem Witch Trials were not an isolated madness. They were a warning of what happens when we abandon reason, when we choose fear over facts, and we stop listening to one another. 3 centuries later, that warning still echoes, and it always will.